Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What is everybody? It is Mars 07. I am streaming, baby. Woo! I'm so sorry, but today we're gonna be reviewing my brackets that I made back in March, before March Madness started. So yeah, it's gonna be very interesting to see how my brackets turned out. As y'all know, UCLA won women's basketball, their first in program history, and Michigan won men's basketball. So there's that. But got but as y'all know, many big people made brackets um, for this March Madness tournament, including myself. So today we're going to be doing that for fun. Today we're going to be doing that. Just kidding. We're not making another bracket. Today we're reviewing all the brackets I made for men's and women's. We're just going to go through it. So yeah, see how right and how wrong I was too. Yeah, no one got a perfect bracket this year. I'm so surprised. I'm not. Anyway, so let's start off with the round 64. I got Duke correct, but it was a very close game because Duke was very shaky in that game. Let's be real. Well, this game right here, the Ohio State TCU game, was the one that busted my bracket, and TCU won that game by 2 points. TCU, I watched that game in class, but TCU got the lead on them. Ohio State never recovered. Well, I mean, they got it was a very close game at the end, but TCU ended up getting the final say, and of course, yeah. St. John's beating Northern Iowa, I got correct. I got Kansas beating Cal Baptist. It was a close game, but Kansas won that. I got Louisville beating South Florida. A lot of people picked South Florida to beat Louisville, but I actually picked Louisville to beat South Florida. So, haha. And then Michigan State, I picked Michigan State to beat North Dakota State, and they did by a decent amount. I picked UCF to beat UCLA, but UCLA ended up winning that game. Then I picked UConn to beat Furman. It was relatively close, but UConn won that. And I picked Arizona to beat Long Island, and they did by a lot. And then I picked Utah State to beat Villanova, and they did by 10. And then I picked Wisconsin to beat High Point, but High Point ended up winning that game by a point. But yeah, that was the biggest upset in the tournament, probably. Well, actually, either that one or the Florida Iowa one. And then I had Arkansas beating Hawaii. Arkansas had them the whole time, pretty much. Then I had BYU beating. I think I picked NC State to actually get through this one, but Texas ended up winning that one. And then I had Gonzaga beating Kennesaw State, and it was a close game, but Gonzaga got them. And then I had Missouri beating Miami, but Miami ended up beating them. I had Purdue beating Queens, and they did by a lot. So yeah, let's go to the South region. I had Florida beating Prairie A&M. They beat the crap out of them. And then I had Iowa beating Clemson. They did. I had Vanderbilt beating McNeese. It was a close game. McNeese actually had to jump pretty early, but Vanderbilt won that in the end. I had Troy beating Nebraska. They beat them up. I actually have Virginia Commonwealth beating North Carolina, and they actually did. So I got an upset correct. And then I picked Illinois to beat Penn, and they did. And then I picked St. Mary's to beat A&M, and A&M beat them by 13. Then I picked Houston to beat Idaho, and they beat them by 29. And then for the Midwest region, I picked Michigan to beat Howard, and they beat them by 21. I picked St. Louis to beat Georgia, and they crushed them. I actually picked Akron to beat Texas Tech because that was my Cinderella. Akron was pretty competitive most of the time, but Texas Tech got the jump in the end, of course. And Alabama beat Hofstra. Hofstra had them early on, but Alabama came in clutch. And then I actually had Tennessee winning. I thought it was going to be SMU in this game, but Miami Ohio ended up beating SMU, so there's that. By the way, shout out to the Speedo guys. I'm pretty sure it's their swim team. Yeah. The Speedo guys were amazing. And then I had Virginia being Wright State. It was a very close game, but Virginia got them though. And then I actually had Santa Clara being Kentucky, and if it weren't for that last second shot for Kentucky, Santa Clara would have won that game. And then I picked Iowa State to beat Tennessee State, and they beat them up. And then so yeah, that's around a 64. I got most of those games correct, I think. Yeah. Anyways, I got 60%. That's not bad. And then for the second round, I had Duke beating Ohio State, but they beat TCU instead. I had Kansas win this game, but St. John's won it in the end. It was a close game, though. I had Michigan State beating Louisville, and they did. I had UConn beating who I thought was UCF, but UConn won. It was this against UCLA. And then I'm just going to go. Actually, let me go back up. Okay, we get this. At Arizona beating Utah State, and they beat them by 12. Wisconsin over Arkansas. Not gonna lie, High Point nearly got him. I thought Wisconsin would make it way further than people thought. Way further than they actually did. But Arkansas beat High Point. It was a very close game. High Point was very competitive. Yeah. Then I had BYU over Gonzaga. It was actually Texas beating Gonzaga. And then I had Purdue over Missouri, but Purdue got the win, but it was against Miami instead. And then I had Michigan beating St. Louis, and they beat them. And then I had Akron beat Bama, but Bama beat Texas Tech because Akron didn't even make it. Then I have Virginia beating Tennessee, but Tennessee actually won that game by 7. And then Iowa State beating Santa Clara. They beat the team that beat Santa Clara. So there's that. And then Florida beat. Excuse me. I actually had Iowa beating Florida before the tournament started, and they did. I had them beating Clemson. I had them beating Florida. So yeah. That was actually insane how I got that correct. So that was probably the biggest upset I predicted. And then I had Vandy beat Nebraska. Nebraska beat them, though, by 2 points. It was a very good game. Very close game, of course. Then I had Illinois beating Virginia Commonwealth, and they did. And Houston over St. Mary's, but Houston won, but they beat A&M instead. Why are you in here right now? I'll be back. And the shit left the room, so I'm just gonna chill out for a bit. All right. Anyways, yeah. Anyways, moving on to the Sweet 16. I had Duke beating Kansas, but they beat St. John's instead. And then I had Michigan State. I had UConn beat Michigan State, and they did. And then I had Arizona beating Wisconsin, but they beat Arkansas instead. And then I had Purdue beating BYU. Purdue beat Texas, and it was a very close game. Texas looked like one of the best 11 seeds. They're the best 11 seed this year. And then I had Vandy beating Iowa. It was actually Iowa beating Nebraska. And then I had Houston over Illinois. It was actually Illinois that won that game. And then I had Michigan beating Akron, but Michigan actually beat Alabama instead. Then I had Virginia beating Iowa State. Tennessee beat Iowa State. So there's that. That's the Sweet 16 and Elite 8. I had Duke beating UConn. UConn won, though, on that last second shot. So just like football, they lost to UConn in a close game, in a one-score game. And then I had Arizona beating Purdue, and they did. And then I had Houston beating Vanderbilt. It was actually Illinois beating Iowa in this case. And I had Michigan beating Virginia. Michigan beat Tennessee, though. So, yeah. And then the Final Four. By the way, someone in my sports entertainment marketing class literally picked the Final Four, all the Final Four correct. He actually picked Illinois to beat UConn, but like he got Michigan as a champion. He got a lot of points out of it because he won our class challenge. Yeah. And then the Final Four is where I completely sold. I had Duke beating Houston. It was UConn beating Illinois. Then I had Arizona beating Michigan, but Michigan beat Arizona instead. And then for the championship, I had Duke winning over Arizona, but Michigan won over UConn. So good for Michigan. Huge, huge win for them considering they were like really bad back then. So yeah. Anyways, there's that. Now let's get to women's. And wow, 35%. That's it. Yeah, let's just say I didn't cook as much in this. Probably. So let's start off by saying I had UConn beating UTSA, and they did. Then I had Syracuse I had Iowa State beating Syracuse. Syracuse actually beat Iowa State instead. Then Maryland versus Murray State. I had Maryland winning. Maryland won that game by a lot. I had North Carolina beating Western Illinois, and they did. I think I actually considered picking Western. I don't know. And then I had Notre Dame beating Fairfield, and they beat Fairfield by 19. And then I had Ohio State beating Howard, and they did by 21. And then I had Illinois Colorado beat Illinois, but Illinois won that game instead. And then I had Vanderbilt beating High Point, and they beat them. Then I had South Carolina beating Southern. They destroyed Southern. Jeez. Then I had USC beating Clemson. They beat them by 4. Then I had Michigan beating Colorado State. It's a very close game, but Michigan eked away the win, or eked away with the win, I guess. Then I had Oklahoma beating Idaho, and they beat them up. Then I had South Dakota State beating Washington, but Washington won that game by 18. Then I had TCU beating San Diego, or UC San Diego, and they did. They crushed them, too. Then I had Virginia beating Georgia, and then they did. That's both tournaments that Georgia lost in the first round as a higher seed as the other opponent. And then I had Iowa beating Fairleigh Dickinson. They beat them. And then let's move on to the other side of the bracket. Ow, jeez. I had UCLA beating California Baptist. They did by a lot. And then I had Oklahoma State beating Princeton, and they did. I had Ole Miss beating Gonzaga, and they did. And then I had Green Bay beating Minnesota. While Minnesota beat by 17 points, Green Bay was leading most of that game. So I actually had a valid reason to pick Green Bay, but Minnesota came away at the end. They clutched up. It mattered. Then I had Baylor beating Nebraska, and they beat them by 5. I had Duke beating Charleston. They beat them by 17. I had Texas Tech beating Villanova, and they beat them by 5. Then I had LSU beating Jacksonville, and they doubled their point total over Jacksonville. Then I had Texas beating Missouri State, and they beat them up. I forgot who I picked in the first 4 for these games. Otherwise, so my apologies in this tournament. Then I had Oregon beating Virginia Tech, and it was actually Virginia Tech I had Virginia Tech beating Oregon. It was actually Oregon that won that game. Then I had Kentucky beating JMU, and they beat JMU by 15. And then I had West Virginia beating Miami of Ohio, and they beat them by a lot, by 28. Then I had Bama beating. They actually had Rhode Island beating Bama, but Bama won that game. Then I had Louisville beating Vermont. And then they beat Vermont. And then I had North Carolina State over Tennessee, and they beat them. And then Michigan beating Holy Cross, and they did. Wait, hold up. Oh, by the way, that Virginia pick was originally, I thought it was going to be Arizona State, but I'll take it, I guess. Take the wins where you can get them. And then moving on, I have for round 32, I have UConn beating Iowa State. They beat Syracuse, though, so I still got credit for it. I had North Carolina beat Maryland. They beat them. And then I had Ohio State over Notre Dame, but Notre Dame actually won that game, got revenge on them for losing football, I guess. And then I had Colorado over Vanderbilt, but Vanderbilt actually beat Illinois in this game. And then I had South Carolina beating USC, had USC over USC. That was correct. I had Oklahoma over Michigan State, and they beat them. I had TCU beating South Dakota State, and they beat Washington. And I think it went to overtime. It was a very close game, very good game. But they beat Washington. And then I had Iowa beating Arizona State in this scenario. But it was actually, I guess, it ended up being Virginia. But Virginia won that game because they're playing for some reason for 10 seed. I don't know why. Yeah. And then I had UCLA over Oklahoma State, and they won that game. And Ole Miss over Green Bay, and Minnesota won that game in clutch. And of course, it was the Ole Miss lost that game. Of course, Green Bay in the game. Minnesota won though. Duke over Baylor, and they beat them. LSU over Texas Tech, and they beat the crap out of Texas Tech. Broke a record doing it too. Texas over Virginia Tech. Texas beat Oregon, so I still get credit for that. West Virginia beating Kentucky. Kentucky actually beat by 1 point. Then I had Louisville over Rhode Island in this scenario, but Louisville beat Bama instead, so I still get points for it. Then Michigan over NC State. They beat NC State. So, yeah. And then I had UConn beating North Carolina, and they beat North Carolina by a lot, by 91. And Ohio State over Colorado, but it was actually Notre Dame beating Vanderbilt, which that was not what I was expecting, of course. I had South Carolina over Oklahoma, and they beat Oklahoma. It was a revenge game for them, to be fair. I had TCU beating Iowa in this scenario, but TCU beat Virginia, so I still get points for it. Then I had UCLA beating Ole Miss, and UCLA actually beat Minnesota instead, but it's still good. I had LSU beating Duke, but pains me to say Duke won that game. It was off that last second shot that barely went in. Then Texas over West Virginia, but Texas beat Kentucky instead. It's practically home. It was de facto home game for them, to be fair. Texas, obviously Fort Worth's 2.5 hours away from them, but still. And then I had Louisville beating Michigan, and Michigan won that game. So there's that. Now I get to the Elite Eight. I had UConn beating Ohio State. UConn actually beat Notre Dame, though. And then I had South Carolina over TCU, and they beat TCU. And UCLA beating LSU. Actually, no, wait. At LSU beating UCLA, but UCLA beat Duke. And then I had Texas beating Louisville, and Texas beat Michigan. They crushed them, too. And then Final Four. This is where things go downhill. I had UConn beating South Carolina. South Carolina beat UConn. Then I had Texas beating LSU, but Texas lost to UCLA. And then I had, in the championship, I had Texas beating UConn. It was actually UCLA beating South Carolina, so there's that. Oh, well, I forgot about the tiebreaker scenario. 155. I said there'd be 155 points scored in the championship game. There's 132, so I was a little overboard with that. Then 161 points scored in the women's game was actually 130, so I actually went overboard on both. Very similar point totals, to be fair. So, yeah. But yeah, there's your tournament analysis. Yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Please like and subscribe. Have a nice day and goodbye. See you next one. Peace.